If the Singapore government offer you free money to help you buy a home, would you take it? At the first glance, HDB grants seem like a fantastic deal. They lower the cost of purchasing a home and make home ownership more accessible. But what if I told you that the grants you accept today could end up costing you a significant amount in the future? Many Singaporeans think of grants as free money, but that isn't entirely true. What most people don't realize is that these grants come with conditions, limitations, and one of the biggest hidden costs that few talk about: CPF accrued interest. Today, we are breaking down everything you need to know about HDB housing grants. We will discuss the types of grants available, who qualifies, and the critical factors that can turn what seems like a financial advantage into a financial setback. Most importantly, we will talk about the strategic way to use them so they can work for you and not against you. If you're planning to buy an HDB flat, or even if you already own one, this is an essential information you need to know before making any major decisions. Let's get started. Before diving into the hidden costs, let's first understand what HDB grants are and how they work. HDB housing grants are financial subsidies provided by the Singapore government to make public housing more affordable. Instead of being given as cash, these grants are credited into your CPF ordinary account, meaning they must be used for your home purchase and cannot be withdrawn directly. There are 4 main types of grants, and each one has a different eligibility criteria, income limits, and maximum amount that you can receive. Understanding these distinctions is crucial because knowing which grants apply to your situation can determine whether you save tens of thousands or end up leaving money on the table. The first and the most well-known grant is the Enhanced CPF Housing Grant, or EHG for short. This grant is available to first-time buyers purchasing either a BTO flat or a resale flat. The key thing to note about EHG is that the amount you receive depends on your monthly household income. The lower your income, the higher the grant. To qualify, at least one applicant must have been employed for the past 12 months. The combined household income must not exceed $9,000 for families or $4,500 for singles. Additionally, the flat being purchased must have at least 20 years of lease remaining. If the household income is on the lower end, the grant can go as high as $120,000 for families and $60,000 for singles. However, as the income increases, the grant amount decreases. For example, a couple earning $5,000 per month would not qualify for the full $120,000. Instead, they would be eligible for only $65,000. The second grant is the CPF housing grant, often referred to as the family grant. Unlike the EHG, which is available for both new and resale flats, the CPF housing grant is strictly for resale flat buyers. To qualify, the applicants must be a first-time buyer with a combined household income not exceeding $14,000 or $21,000 for extended families. The amount you receive depends on the flat type. If you are purchasing a 2 to 4 room resale flat, the maximum grant is $80,000 for families. If you are purchasing a 5 room or larger resale flat, the maximum amount is $50,000. For singles, the grant amount is half of what families receive. A single applicant buying a 4 room resale flat can receive $40,000, while purchasing a 5 room flat would qualify for $25,000. Third grant is the Proximity Housing Grant, which is unique because it has no income ceiling. The purpose of this grant is to encourage families to live closer together. To qualify, an applicant must be purchasing a resale flat either within 4 kilometers of their parents or children, or in the same household as them. If the applicant chooses to live with their parents or children, the grant amount is $30,000 for families and $15,000 for singles. If the flat is within 4 kilometers but not in the same house, the grant amount is slightly lower at $20,000 for families and $10,000 for singles. The last grant is the Singles Grant, which is specifically for Singaporeans aged 35 and above who are purchasing a resale flat either alone or with another single applicant. The eligibility requirements includes a household income that does not exceed $7,000. The amount they receive is also dependent on the flat type. If a single applicant is buying a 2 to 4 room resale flat, they can receive $40,000, while for a 5 room resale flat, they would receive $25,000. If two single applicants purchase a resale flat together, each of them receive $25,000 for smaller flats and $12,500 for each larger flats. Now, we have covered the available grants. A critical question comes up. can you apply for these grants more than once? HDB prioritize first-time home buyers, which means that most grants are only available once. This is an important point to consider because once you use your grants, they are gone. However, what if you previously owned a private property? The good news is that if you have never used your HDB grants before, you can still apply for them later, even if you previously owned private property. The key condition is that you must sell all private properties and wait 30 months before applying for an HDB flat with grants. On the other hand, if you have already used an HDB grant in the past, you cannot apply for it again. Additionally, private property downgraders who buy an HDB flat within 30 months of selling their private homes will also not be eligible for grants. Many homeowners fail to consider this limitation when deciding whether to take a grant now or save it for later. But what's even more critical is the hidden cost that most buyers don't think about: CPF accrued interest. One of the biggest misconceptions about HDB grants is that they are free money, but there's a catch. When CPF funds, including grants, are used for housing, they accrue interest at a rate of 2.5% per year. This interest represents the amount of money that you would have been earned if the money had been in your CPF ordinary account. That means when you sell your HDB property, you are not just returning the original amount of CPF funds that you will use, but also the accrued interest that has built up over time. For example, let's say you use 200,000 from your CPF for your home purchase, including grants and your down payment. If you hold a flat for 5 years, the accrued interest at 2.5% per year would amount to around 26,282. This means that when you sell the property, the total amount that you have to refund to your CPF would be 226,282. Even if your flat appreciates in value, a significant portion of your proceeds will be returned to CPF instead of going into your pocket. This is why some homeowners are shocked when they sell their flats and realize they are left with much less cash than expected. The longer you hold your flat, the more accrued interest builds up, which reduces your cash proceeds upon sale. This is a crucial factor to consider when deciding whether to take the grants. Now that we have understood the impact of accrued interest, the next big question is, when is the best time to take an HDB grant? Should you use it now or should you save it for later? Since HDB grants are a one-time opportunity, deciding when to use them is critical. There is no universal right answer because it depends on your long-term financial strategy, your career trajectory, and whether you plan to own private property in the future. For some people, taking the grants now make the most sense. For others, delaying them until later could be the better financial decisions. So, how do you decide? If you are a first-time buyer who needs financial help immediately, then taking the grants now is a logical choice. This is especially relevant for young couples or individuals in the early stages of their career who do not have substantial savings for a down payment. The grants help to reduce the financial burden, making it easier to afford an HDB flat sooner rather than later. Another scenario where taking the grants now makes sense is if you are buying a resale flat instead of a BTO flat. Resale flats are typically more expensive, and the CPF housing grants and proximity housing grant can help reduce the price gap between resale and new flats. Since resale flats do not benefit from government subsidized pricing like the BTO flats, these grants can significantly ease the financial strain. Additionally, if you do not plan to own a private property in the future, using a grant now is a practical decision. For individuals or families who are comfortable staying in an HDB flat long term, there is no reason to delay taking grants. However, what if you have long-term plans to upgrade to private property, or you foresee major changes in your financial situation? In that case, it might make sense to save your grants for later. If you plan to own private property first, then delaying the use of your HDB grants can be a strategic move. Some home buyers prefer to start with private property while their income is high and later sell their private homes to move into an HDB flat during retirement. By doing so, they can apply for full HDB grants later when they no longer have private property and when their income is significantly lower. This approach works well for high-income earners who intend to downgrade in retirement. Instead of using the grants early in life when they do not need them, they wait until they are no longer earning a high salary. Since HDB grants are tied to income levels, having no income in retirement allows them to qualify for the maximum grant amount. Similarly, individuals working overseas who eventually plan to return to Singapore may also benefit from delaying the use of HDB grants by purchasing private property first while working abroad and later selling it to buy an HDB flat. They ensure they can still take full advantage of the grants when they actually need them. Finally, saving grants for later can be useful for retirement planning. When individuals retire, their income often drops to zero, which means they may qualify for the highest grant amount at a time when they actually need financial support. This is why some people opt to buy private property first, build wealth over time, and then transition to an HDB flat during retirement to maximize government subsidies. But regardless of whether you take grants now or later, one critical mistake to avoid is holding onto your flat too long and accumulating excessive CPF accrued interest. Many home buyers do not realize that the longer they hold onto their flat, the more accrued interest builds up. This is why some people sell their flats only to realize that after refunding their CPF principal plus accrued interest, they are left with much less cash than they expected. So how can you avoid this problem? The key is to manage your CPF usage strategically and to take proactive steps to reduce the impact of accrued interest. One way to minimize accrued interest is to sell your flat within a shorter period rather than holding onto it indefinitely. The longer your CPF funds are locked into your property, the more interest builds up, which reduce your final cash proceeds. Selling before the accrued interest accumulates too much can help ensure that you walk away with more cash in hand. Another option is to make voluntary CPF refunds before selling your property. If you have an extra cash on hand, you can return some CPF funds to your ordinary account before selling the flat. This reduces the accrued interest that needs to be paid back upon sale. Using cash for mortgage payments instead of relying entirely on CPF is also a good strategy. Every time CPF is used to service a mortgage, it accrues additional interest. By making some payments in cash instead, you reduce the amount of CPF that needs to be refunded later. Finally, homeowners who plan to upgrade to private property can consider refinancing their loans to reduce interest payments. This can help lower the overall financial burden while ensuring that they maintain control over how much CPF is being utilized. This strategy ensures that you are not unnecessarily paying excessive CPF accrued interest when you sell your HDB flat. But ultimately, the most important question remains: are HDB grants actually a financial trap? After looking at all the details, eligibility requirements, grants limitations, CPF accrued interest, and financial strategies, it is clear that the HDB grants are neither a curse nor a blessing on their own. HDB grants can be a powerful tool when used correctly. They provide substantial financial relief for first-time home buyers and can significantly reduce the upfront cost of purchasing a home. If you plan to stay in an HDB flat long-term and do not intend to own private property, then using the HDB grants early can be beneficial. However, if used without proper planning, they can work against you. Many people take grants without realizing that they must be repaid through CPF upon selling their flat. This often results in disappointments when they found out that a large portion of their sale proceeds must go back into their CPF account, leaving them with far less cash than expected. For those with higher earning potential or aspirations to upgrade to a private property, using grants too soon can be a missed opportunity. By using grants strategically, either taking them early when they are needed most or delaying them to maximize subsidies in retirement, home buyers can ensure that HDB grants work in their favor rather than against them. Ultimately, the key takeaway is this: HDB grants are not free money, but they can be an excellent financial tool if used with a clear strategy. Taking grants is easy, but planning how to use them wisely is what truly matters. Understanding when to use them, how to manage your CPF accrued interest, and knowing when to exit your flat can mean the difference between a strong financial position and an unexpected financial burden. So the real question is not whether HDB grants are a curse or a blessing. The real question is whether you are making them work for you, or if you are unknowingly setting yourself up for a financial strain in the future. Now that you have all this information, what do you think? Would you take HDB grants now, or would you wait until later? If you found this useful, leave me a like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next one.